10 o'clock. The next card up to speak was Carlos Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez.
Interested, there's a pay.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
Members of the council. Really just wanted to recap just in general. I fully agree with Councilman Hunter's comments about, the good of residents here in Victorville. And, when we asked the Rose Institute for their analysis, they had concluded that putting a temporary hold on the fees would potentially increase local income, employment, tax revenue, and might even increase the total volume of fees collected. So that really is the context of where we're, again, reiterating our request that was highlighted in our May 9th letter. And there's really two areas that we wanted to leave you with. And that is, first, whatever you decide today or at a subsequent council meeting, we're respectfully asking that you would please take a look at the Nexus study, our review of our comments, and how the fee ought to be adjusted to $8,961 as the baseline of the accurate fee that we're referring to in general. It was noted yesterday that there was no revenue loss, that actually, unbeknownst to anyone, that all along, even during the phase-in, we were actually overpaying, albeit slightly. And so we would ask that regardless of the outcome that you have on our adjustment of the fee to $4,900, that at least have the fee accurate at the end of the day. So again, regardless of your decision today, we would hope that we can at least be working off of a baseline fee that is accurate. $8,900 is the approximate number we estimate. And then secondly, temporarily adjusting the fee, we would say 12 months ideally to look at it again, and then have the park and the facility fees considered at that time. But in the meantime, just put those temporarily aside in light of the housing recession that we're dealing with, particularly in the high desert. The $4,900 fee would be in place during that time, and we could move forward accordingly. So you have allowed us to have not one but two, maybe even missing how many workshops we've had. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you as always. We're coming from a position of partners, as it's been mentioned before, and again, thank you for the opportunity to have this this dialogue. So appreciate it.
Questions or comments from members of the council?
Carlos, just a point of clarification, since you happen to be the first one up there. The Ontario example I used yesterday, when I read the article, I didn't quite understand it. We had more clarification on it between yesterday and today.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, what Ontario is doing, we were already doing, but we didn't. They have an 8-month limit on collecting these fees at the occupancy, point of occupancy, and ours doesn't have any particular limit on it. So we're actually ahead of Ontario in this respect. I didn't understand. I thought they were deferring the fees, had frozen those down, and that's not exactly what they're doing. They're just saying pay it when the people move in, front end. So
right, that was one thing that we had initially brought up, and it was brought to our attention by our members that indeed the council staff, the policy is that you already allow that. So you already are reacting to.
Frank mentioned it down at Sandbag the other day when he was complimenting a couple of cities. He did mention Victorville, and he mentioned that aspect of it too. But I didn't understand the Ontario one until now. So.
Yeah, it was a bit apples and oranges, and again, your explanation is right on as far as the C of O payment, and they didn't have a proposed increase as the city here does. So we're hopeful that you would be flexible with respect to our proposal. So.
if I might.
Bet.
Thank you. I don't know if, Carlos, you want to answer this, or Frank can answer it when he comes up. I have a bit of concern. We talked about this, I guess it's been a month ago. I know the dates are getting all, we've been going so long. Seems like the city of Victorville is the only one that's being approached to lower their fees. You know, I've spoken with individuals at Hesperia and Apple Valley, Atlanto. They have not been approached to give some kind of package to the BIA. If I look at Hesperia, their fees are $19,000, over $19,000 for diff fees. If I look at Apple Valley, they're almost $14,000 for diff fees. Yet you're asking us to bring ours down to $4,900. A little bit of concern that you have not gone to those other cities. And to be honest, I don't want to be used as a guinea pig for us to do it and then go after them. I'm a little disheartened that you haven't gone to the other cities together to try to do this at one time as a regional basis rather than just coming to Victorville. And they haven't, I've asked them, they haven't even been approached with this to lower their fees or give some kind of stimulus package. None of the council members that I've talked to have been approached to do this. So why is it just Victorville that's being asked to do this and the other communities aren't?
Okay, I'm going to defer to
That's
Frank
fine.
on this.
That's okay, Mr. Mayor.
We're very aggressively going to all the other cities. One reason we came to the city of Victorville first, because last year over half of all the building permits in the county were here. We see Victorville as probably the most friendly city towards businesses, and it wasn't that we just came to you first. Your development impact fee has been on the board since almost last year, and so we've been working on it, and since that period of time, the building industry continues to suffer, as other businesses who depend on the industry, they're suffering too. And we're just asking you for a temporary jump start to see if it will indeed stimulate some new building that will create more jobs for the city. So we didn't single you out. We think that when you look at economic development and business, you're a lot more reasonable than most cities. And we've always enjoyed a great partnership with the city of Victorville, and you've always recognized the fact that when times are hard, you've always worked with us in the past, and we don't think that we're asking you for anything unreasonable, because as you go through the process, you will be able to see the numbers, and at that time you can revisit it. We aren't asking for permanent help. We're just asking for a short period of time. And I hate to keep going back about the $7 million that Mr. Gargan said the city lost, but I think Jeff rebutted that argument where you actually overcharged as far as the flaw in the previous studies that you've had. So we're just asking you for what we think is reasonable and something that would not only help us, but it will help the city, and it'll help the complementary businesses that depend on the industry.
Well, that's fine, except I look at Apple Valley, who's now in some major retail growth in their area. But then I look at Hesperia's park fees, which are higher than ours, and you haven't approached them about their park fees and their population. No, wait a minute. From what I've understand from their council members, and I've talked to them, they have not been approached by the BIA to lower their park fees. Their park fees are higher than ours with less population, yet we're being asked to lower our park fees. So I guess it's okay for Hesperia to have higher park fees than ours, but nothing's happening with the other communities around us.
As we speak, we're working with Hesperia staff, and we will be getting to the city council.
Well,
as we will be getting to every city in the county where there has been activity.
Well, as of this week, I have spoken to both cities, Apple Valley and Hesperia, who have said they've received nothing from BIA requesting any changes of any kind, and that's staff and council members. So I don't know.
I'll be happy to show you the letters of request to each of those cities that we have presented our economic stimulus package to. Nobody has been left out. In fact, your mayor and your city manager attended the mayor's conference where at that time we indicated to those present that we were approaching every city. It's not that we're picking on Victorville or any other city. There are not too many times that we come to you and ask for something like this. We know that this is a painful time for all of us. I see where you have had to close down for a day because of budget constraints and things like that, mainly because building is not going. People have lost their jobs. In fact, I've got over 10,000 construction workers that live here in the Victor Valley who aren't working. And those are the people who are buying the trucks and the cars, and I think you're going to see your sales tax affected somewhat. So we're trying to, this is just a tool that you could use, and if after 6 months you review it and it doesn't work, go for it. But we're just asking you to work with us and help stimulate the economy. You talk about Apple Valley. The reason their industrial and commercial stuff is going on over there now is because of the rooftops that have been built. I mean, behind Victorville, Apple Valley and Hesperia are right there with building permits. As I mentioned, over 50% of all the permits in the county have been pulled here in the high desert. So naturally, we would want to start in the area where the most building is. And they have the rooftops. If they didn't have the rooftops in Apple Valley, they wouldn't be building any commercial. Your own economic development director says that retail follows rooftops. So, you know, I don't want to beat the horse to death. I mean, it's plain and simple to see what the economy is. It's plain to see how our industry has affected, which affects you as well. It's not like us against you, but we're all in all this together. And we're in desperate times, and sometimes in desperate times you have to take radical steps. And although I don't see this as being that radical, I see it as one of the levers that government can pull, just like the Federal Reserve, with interest rates. And if we were here asking for long-term help, I'd have the same position that you have, but we're asking for a temporary help here.
Thanks, Frank.
Don Brown, you had a card in yesterday. You were the last card that we did not get to.
Last but not least.
For sure.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This morning we submitted a letter which was actually emailed to the city last night from the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties. This letter was originated by Robert Evans, who is our executive director. This letter was reviewed by our executive board, and I was asked to make sure that it got submitted as a member of the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties to the council this morning. We had outlined 4 items of concern that were documented in this letter, and would like to continue some dialogue with the city in relation to those 4 items that were outlined in this letter. We have watched with interest how this entire development impact fee scenario has evolved. We, of course, understand that the city of Victorville needs to generate additional income. At this point in time, the commercial industry has already been assessed for transportation, fire, police, and now we have an issue with park and facilities. And one of the things that we have brought to the attention of the council, hopefully this morning, is that, in fact, when either an industrial building, office building, or retail center is built, that usually does not add to the population base of a city. The city would not be required to provide additional parks because somebody located a 150,000 square foot retail center in that city. That would be a destination for the members of the community to go and shop, and also to provide employment, and also to provide sales tax revenue back to the city, which has been an important component of the budget of the city of Victorville. We're facing an election in June. Looks like it's probable that the city will become a charter city. At that point in time, it appears there will be additional options for the city to generate additional revenue. And we would ask that at this point in time that the city withhold levying the commercial industry with any additional fees until such time as it can be ascertained how going from a general law city to a charter city is going to impact the budget in relation to parks and facilities. We're in support of our friends at VIA, and we understand the dilemma and the crisis that they're going through at this point in time. We understand that development has to pay its own way. But if you truly look at what development does pay in relation to the fees that we currently pay, not only for park and recreation, transportation, police, and fire, but also for our water connection fees, our sewer connection fees, our school fees, our planning fees, our building permit fees, we are probably one of the more heavily taxed industries in the country today. We also have an issue with the Southern California Logistics Airport. We think it's a tremendous resource for this area and look forward to working with the city and our partners over at Sterling and CB. But there is a question that's been brought to our attention through other developers that are currently active in the area, that if there is such a tremendous shortfall in income right now in the city of Victorville, why is it that projects that are being constructed at SCLA are not being assessed a development impact fee at this time? That appears to be a tremendous source of revenue that has not been identified in this report, and we would encourage the city to look at some modified approach towards that area. We understand that the agreement was made to waive fees out in that particular market or sub-market and sphere of influence back in probably 97, 98. I really haven't had the time to research it, and that would be Mr. Evans' responsibility actually to do that. But we think that as a community partner and a business partner in this region, it would be in the city's best interest to start evaluating whether they could possibly pay some of their fair share in relation to some of these fees. I'm here to answer any questions to the council.
Questions or comments from members of the council? Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Mayor.
We'll come back to it. Janice Miller.
So I apologize. I just wanted to put I've been coming to all these workshops, and I wanted to put a face to the people this will impact, which is our company. Excuse me. We're a land surveying civil engineering company. We actually do work for the city of Victorville. We've done your National Trails Highway. We've done the lead track. We're the surveyors for that. And some of the points that were brought up by the Rose Institute was the quality of employees and the income that they generate and then spend here in the city. Excuse me. My husband's a licensed land surveyor. Our son has his LSIT, which is land surveyor in training. We have a licensed engineer in staff. She holds a bachelor's degree. I hold a bachelor's degree. My daughter is a year away from getting her bachelor's degree in accounting, so she can help run the business. We're the kind of people you want to keep. Our staff has bought houses in Victorville. They do spend their money locally. I think what BIA is asking is very reasonable in order to help keep the kind of people that you want and have the kind of city that Victorville wants. And I ask you to really consider that because we do work for Mr. Tatum. And like Jim said, he's weathered the last recession. Well, so did we. It was real tough. And of course, the first thing that goes is staff. If I have to let go of staff, they're going to have to probably go back down the hill. And then it's going to be extremely hard for me to get qualified, educated people back up here because they're going to have to sell their house and then move wherever they can get the work. So it's very hard on an industry like ours that is very specialized. There's very few land surveyors out there that are licensed. It's a very hard test to pass and a license to get. PE and engineer is very hard also. So when you get good people like we finally have to be faced with this crisis where we're looking really hard at trying to keep them busy every single day where we used to be, of course, and I understand last year was a great year, but, they also become family. You care for them, you know their lives, and, they know yours. But to have to lose them because, like Jim said, we can weather another downturn. If it has to be, it can be just, my husband, me, my daughter, my son. I said, we can do it all if we had to. But we would lose really good people, and that would be very hard for us to recoup. So 6 months is a real good temporary. I ask you to really consider it. No one's asking for anything forever. My one concern in Councilmember Hunter, you brought it up on parks. And I'm just going to give you my observation. I actually happen to live in Apple Valley, the county. There is a park right by our house. You're right. On summer nights, weekends, it's got the little t-ball, it's got the soccer. Otherwise, because we do live out in a remote area, very few people, actually go to the park. And you were talking to Mr. Tatum about, I guess, a future park out at George Air Force Base. Well, yes, I think it would probably be good because it would be used. But for those individual items, it would not be something that would be used on a daily basis. If you want a park that wants to be used on a daily basis, it would have to be in where there's much more people. And I see this all the time out where I live.
Way over your 3 minutes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you.
All the cards that I have, there anyone else in the audience who had intended to speak but failed to turn in one of the white cards? Not, then I will close the public participation portion of this discussion, and now the council and Mr. Roberts will discuss and dialogue on this subject. Before I ask Mr. Roberts to respond specifically to the issue raised by Mr. Brown with regard to SCLA, I got to tell you, that comes as the biggest shock to me in the entire dialogue on this subject. SCLA is the economic engine that has driven the economy in this valley for 15 years. And to suddenly suggest that somehow Southern California Logistics Airport is receiving some type of extraordinary benefit tells me, Don, that you haven't done your homework. Now, maybe you're right, and maybe we should scrap the opportunity to create jobs and to attract the kinds of businesses and industries out there that we are. Perhaps we should not give any incentives to companies like Boeing and GE to try to get them to locate world-class facilities here that put us on the map, so that good companies like yours have another marketing tool to go out and entice retail and commercial developers. I don't share that philosophy. And I would hope that you'd take an hour or two of your time and sit down with Keith Metzler, our Director of Redevelopment, and get a thorough understanding of the tax structure, the redevelopment concepts that are in place that are the backbone of support for what we're doing out there. And as to Mr. Evans' suggestion, I guess one of the things that just really bugs me about this whole process is that it's not like it just popped out of the bottle in the last couple of days. This discussion about DIF fees originated before Christmas. Granted, it was an informal discussion by some members of this industry with me asking the question, would this city council entertain some type of modification of the then to be implemented DIF fee? It wasn't as though we just decided we were going to raise DIF fees. This was a programmed event that was scheduled to occur, worked out in advance over a year ago with the BIA in order to avoid the ups and downs and the unpredictability, going for long periods of time, and then trying to make catch-up decisions. Started before Christmas. And I suggested to the individuals who approached me about it that I had no idea what this city council's attitude would be, but that it seemed to me that had to have the best shot of presenting a reasonable argument was that they needed to have your industry, needed to have some type of economic analysis that would show why the argument being made by the building industry in total would work to the good of both sides, the building industry and the city. Not being accusatory, but that process has taken us now 5 months. The original implementation of a fee for whatever amount it might be through this process has been delayed 5 months. That happens every time we get to the DIF fees. Every time there is one or more entities who take exception, they ask for us to be considerate, they ask for us to postpone, they ask for us to delay, they ask for us to work with them. We do, and then we get nothing but flack and grief. Now, Mr. Evans' letter, I'm going to ask Mr. Roberts and Mr. Metzler to comment on the 4 specific questions that are outlined, even though it's a very untimely submittal when you consider the fact that we've been coming to meetings now for weeks, and to get it on the morning of the last meeting, I think is pretty unreasonable. And you can tell Mr. Evans that I feel that way. And his statement that if we don't do this, that we're going to, in essence, he says, without a doubt, will slow the economic recovery of Victorville and provide your neighboring municipalities with a distinct financial advantage relating to development costs. We're already the lowest there are. So I really take exception to that. I'm going to pass this letter to Mr. Roberts, and either you or Mr. I want you to specifically respond to the 4 questions raised and then to provide detail to Mr. Brown concerning the uniqueness of UCLA.
UCLA?
It's closed. Closed.
I heard UCLA.
SCLA. If I said UCLA, I'll pay a $5 fine.
Along with Mr. Williams' $5 fine. Don't think you thought I missed that? I already paid $10. Here's the phone over there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The first question asked on the letter from the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties, why in these discussions that we're currently having regarding a reduction in development impact fees and economic incentive package, are we not including retail, office, industrial, high cube, and warehouse development? I think there's already been an agreement made based upon both state law and sandbag action that we cannot reduce road fees without continuing to be found in noncompliance by sandbag, which would then withhold some of our transportation state subventions, and also the indication that the city was not prepared to make downward adjustments in fire and police. The commercial and industrial development impact fee, there is a zero component in that fee for park and recreational facilities. When the fee was computed, there was a recognition, as Mr. Brown pointed out, that those types of developments don't in of themselves generate a need for park and recreational facilities. So there is zero components, so there would be nothing in that component to reduce. It's already at zero. On the second question, which was the assessment of development impact fees at former George Air Force Base, Southern California Logistics Airport. This city has always strived, and quite successfully, in my opinion, tried to find ways to reduce development impact fees by using other revenue sources that were available. All throughout the 90s, the development impact fees were reduced substantially based upon recognition of other revenue sources coming into the city, such as Measure I. Primarily, sandbag keeps closing that loophole. In fact, in my opinion, they're tightening the noose now. The new Measure I language specifically contains prohibitions against using not only Measure I monies, but any state and federal monies to offset what sandbag considers to be the developer's fair share, and they have done their own nexus study. So your ability as policymakers to use whatever resources are available to continue to minimize the development impact fees, those options are being taken away from you. What this city council did, I think, quite brilliantly, is in recognition of the uniqueness of George Air Force Base, and particularly the adoption of the redevelopment plan, brought a funding ability to redevelop George Air Force Base. So all of the roads, the infrastructure, it is being paid for out of the redevelopment project area. So the cost of those projects are not included into the development impact fee portion, nor is that revenue. So we have found a way, and of course the cost of that project is way out of skew with the rest of any other development in the city. The cost to transform that project from a military facility into a commercial facility is hundreds of millions of dollars. But this city found a way to do that without putting it on the backs of developers. So there is neither an obligation to pay for those improvements, nor is there a development impact fee.
But, Mr. Roberts, we could change that policy. We could follow Mr. Brown and Mr. Whatever his name is, Evans' suggestion. We could scrap that, and we could impose development impact fees at George Air Force. I'm not suggesting it. I understand the art of politics is the possible, and the possible in Victorville's 3 votes. But clearly, a public policy decision could be made. There were 3 votes to scrap what we've been doing at George Air Force Base and treat it just like every other part of the city of Victorville and impose development impact fees?
Absolutely. There's no prohibition against developing impact fees, but it would be contrary to what the entire formula of success for SCLA has been built upon. The whole underpinning of the redevelopment project area and the redevelopment of George Air Force Base plan is to cause, let's say, I guess maybe an unnatural acceleration in the development of SCLA. Airports normally develop very slowly over a long period of time, 20 or 30 years. And while airports are hugely successful projects, that's generally the time horizon that you think about. And you can look, many airports were former military bases. LAX was a transformed military Air Force base many, many years ago. So what the whole formula is to accelerate economic development over what would be its natural progression because of its remote location, lack of infrastructure. And so the only way to do that is to invest heavily into the project. To impose a development impact fee would be contrary to that entire formula. The third item is what would be the impact of the charter. We don't have specific numbers at this time, but one of the major reasons for pursuing the charter city is because we believe that the current system in the state of California, and particularly in San Bernardino County being controlled by Sandbag, is broken. We don't think there will ever be the funds available, particularly in the high desert, given the lack of funding down in the valley, to ever build the projects or even receive our fair share of money. And then on top of that, with all of the approval process now that you have to go through with Sandbag and with Caltrans, we don't think it is possible to ever keep up with our transportation needs under that formula. So we are looking for a new formula under Charter City that would both accelerate the ability to develop transportation and other public projects, reduce the cost of that, and also create an opportunity, which is currently prohibited by state law, for a public-private partnership where private sector could actually invest into our transportation dollars. We think that these programs have the potential, much as our redevelopment plan has been successful in George Air Force Base and has eliminated the need to place those development impact fees upon developers, we're hoping that this process can also steer us in the same direction, which is to try to minimize or steer away to the greatest extent as possible that we can of relying upon development impact fees, because it's a flawed system. It just doesn't work, but that's all there is right now from the state of California. So once the charter amendment is approved, we think it is appropriate to go back in and once we understand what all of the potential benefits of that program are, that our future Nexus studies, as our previous Nexus studies have done, would use every tool that is available to us from other outside resources in order to minimize the impact of development impact fees. And finding number 4, I think, is the same issue, that the commercial and industrial development does not add to the population base. That has already been accounted for in the fact that we do not charge any fee for park and recreation programs on the commercial, retail, industrial development.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I just would add to that discussion, that dialogue. I'm not particularly concerned about what decisions they may make in Apple Valley or Hesperia or Adelanto or elsewhere. Every city is unique. Every city is different. Every city has its own vision for tomorrow. And I, for one, am not interested in some kind of a homogenized version of cities in the desert. I don't think any other city would like it either. One of our uniquenesses, which was a decision made by the founding fathers and mothers of this city was to be a no property tax city. And so I don't think it's good analysis to compare us to anybody else, because as far as I know, we are the only city in this county, certainly the only city in the high desert, to be in that position, which means we don't have access to some revenue streams that our other cities might have. In response to Ms. Miller, you know, it's which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Any of you in this room who read the daily press with any regularity would know that we are constantly beat up because some of our citizens feel that we do not pay enough attention to infrastructure, that we are too cozy with the building industry, we're allowing growth that should not occur because facilities are not there, including parks, and you all go home at night and do whatever you choose to do, but the 5 elected officials, as well as our senior staff, have an obligation to react to everybody's perceptions and everybody's needs. And that includes infrastructure necessary for people to move about and to recreate and to have opportunities for youth. All of these things are part of a quality of life issue in every city, and they are important quality of life issues in this city. And I know they're important quality of life issues to the building industry. So, you know, trying to find some balance, some recognition that there's competition for the dollars. There's competition for the ideas of what this city should be and what it can become, which always gets mixed up in the discussion on DIF fees. I have said before, I'll say it again, I think the BIA does itself a disservice by constantly badgering this city to make concessions, to do studies, to delay the process, because we get further and further and further behind. The gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think that's unfair to the 105,000 people that live here, and I think in the long term it works a disservice to your industry in terms of having the infrastructure and the amenities that make it an attractive place for people to want to buy a house and live. Now, I'm not in your industry, and you may tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'll accept that, but that is my view, and that is the view of a lot of people in this valley. I said 5 months ago when we started this process that I was very concerned, and I said it the last time a year or so ago, or a year and a half ago when we were on the DIF fees, that our DIF fees were lower than our sister cities, and that didn't really seem to square with getting beat up a year and a half ago on the DIF fee issue. And so when we talked about it 5-6 months ago, I said, what are you doing with regard to the other cities? Are we in this box alone with you, or is there going to be a fair sharing of the pain of this issue? I was assured that there would be an effort in all cities so that everybody kind of dealt with this issue together, and I agree with Councilman Hunter. The intelligence I get from the people I speak to, I haven't talked to anybody in Atlanta, so I don't know what the situation is there. But the intelligence I get with regard to Apple Valley and Hesperia is there's no move afoot, and there will be huge resistance if and when the BIA makes a formal effort to do that, which, again, makes me wonder why Victorville all the time. For 5-6 months, the BIA has been engaged with Victorville on this subject, and it seems a little incongruous to me that maybe tomorrow or next week or next month or whenever there'll be a full court press with our sister cities. That's a difficult pill to swallow for me. We've already, I think we need to focus on where we're at. We've already acknowledged with the BIA's concurrence, and I thank them for that, the transportation DIF fees are off the table. We have no control, well, before I go there, and that police and fire are off the table. And so when you take transportation, police and fire off the table, and you recognize that we have pass-through obligations that we have no legal authority to deal with, as I understand it. That would be schools, and there's a couple of other pass-through agencies, and I can't remember what they are right now. So really, we're going through a bloodletting over one category of fees, as I see it, and that's park and facilities. I've asked some legal questions of counsel. You've been in the audience when I've asked them before. So before we focus in on the core issue, I would ask our city attorney, Mr. D. Bortnowski, to give us a brief summary of his opinions based upon the questions that were asked.
Thank you, Mayor Caldwell. Yes, on the, I think it was the May 5th meeting, you had inquired, you basically raised three issues. The first was whether or not the city would have the authority to withhold further approvals on, for example, Project A, if a developer hadn't paid fees on Project B. The short answer to that is probably no. The approval process and the issuance of permits is essentially a ministerial act, and if the developer has paid all of the fees on Project A, there'd be no justification to withhold further approvals on that project, regardless of what happened with respect to Project B. The second issue was with respect to potentially having a developer build a public park as opposed to the city doing it with the fees collected, and whether that could be done to avoid prevailing wage. Unfortunately, under the current scheme, statutory scheme, we would not avoid the prevailing wage issue there if the developer was to build in lieu of the city doing it and essentially entering into a fee credit arrangement. The statute specifically address fee credit arrangements, and that is not a way of avoiding the prevailing wage issue. However, keep in mind that if the city becomes a charter city, you're going to have far more latitude and flexibility with respect to that issue, and we'll be probably able to avoid prevailing wage and be able to enter into arrangements where the developer could build the park against sort of the private-public partnership arrangement. So there can be significant cost savings, assuming that comes to fruition. The third one was whether or not you could essentially provide a refund to a developer if they paid the fees up front and didn't complete the project. We need to look at the city's fee collection timetable. Essentially, what the statutes provide is that those fees should be collected at certificate of occupancy or certificate of completion, and so there's no statutory authority for any kind of refund program or anything like that currently, either in the code or in the statutes.
Questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Gargan, we asked you to take a look at the numbers. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion with regard to your numbers and Mr. Seminelli's numbers. Did you have a chance to look at that? Want to come up and share your thoughts with us?
Council, in regards to these comments for the 2006, where we went through and basically readjusted the acreage. At that time, the accepted amount was agreed upon was 143 acres was the nexus for any fees. And then in going back, excuse me, and as he brought to the forefront, they thought the 2002 and 2005 updates had overreach in park acreage. So I went back and took a look at that yesterday afternoon and double-checked everything again this morning. And indeed, in 2002, we had 191 acres on there. And one of the sites that was taken off in 2006 was Rockview Nature Park. So if you remove that from the 2002 Nexus study, and that's 52 acres, that would drop us down to 139 acres, which puts us below the 143 that was the agreed upon Nexus amount. That amount that was charged, that we had to charge against for the next 13 years was a total of $450,000. I didn't go into the, how many permits and what the amount was per permit. I just took an even number, took the 13 years and divided that into that $450,000. That averaged to $34,615.38 per year for the 2002, 2003, 2004 years. And in 2005, there was a total of 208 acres on the list. Again, subtract out the Rockview Nature Park, which was 52 acres. At that time, we had lowered that amount to 300,000, and there was only 10 years left in the sundown on the DIF study. So that would average. It's not a perfect number I'm coming up with, but I'm just trying to give you an example. That would be $30,000 for the 1 year that was enforced until it was dropped off in 2006. So that left another 13 acres. So I looked at the study, and I went to the parks that were being charged equivalent of $550,000 an acre for acquisition and development, and multiplied that by the 13. That came out to $7.15 million. Again, that was a 10-year window on that, so that accumulated $715,000. You add those up, it comes out to $848,846. That they may have been overcharged, but if you equate that to the over $7 million that we showed based on what was an approved amount and what was actually paid, it shows that we were still under-collected over $6 million.
Thank you, Mr. Garden. Questions or comments?
I had a question, John. If the DIF fee was suspended for, suspended for, say, 6 months, what would be the loss for the park and rec, or for the park fee?
Are you talking suspended or deferral?
Well, deferred.
Well, deferred, there would be no loss because of the fact that we would get it back if you follow the pattern of what Ontario was doing, which we already do that anyway, and we already defer it till the completion, till they get their C of O. If they're talking, I believe 100, let's say 100 units at $7,000, I think is what the share is. So we're looking at $700,000.
Okay, so we're looking at 100 units within the 6 months.
Well, that's the number yesterday that they threw out just as a number just to throw out, just something that's easy to figure in regards to that. And actually, that could go down, that could go up.
And why do you remove Rockview Nature Park from your figures?
Well, that was in order to get down to the actual numbers. That was a park that was taken out. It's a nature park. We figured that the need was more in program parks at that time. It's not that we're taking it out of our program, that we run it. It was just taken out of the DIF nexus.
You take it out of the calculations.
Yeah, we took it out of the calculations.
Yeah.
So that they would based on that's what was accepted in 2006. So that's why I went back and removed that out of 2002 and 2005.
But it's still a park. You
Right.
still use it as a park. Why not include it in your calculations?
Because it was an existing park and the expansion, because it also included, the numbers included the expansion and the purchase of additional property from the LADWP at that time. And so the cost, there's not much development that can be done in programming. It's a nature park, and so that was the choice that was made in 2006, was to remove that park and keep in the parks that needed to be developed. That could be programmed for soccer and football and Little League usage.
Mr. Arnold, wasn't that decision also influenced by dialogue with the BIA, who objected to the Rockview Park being in the calculations?
Not that I'm aware of. They just was trying to cut down the number and eliminate the number of acres of park that were on the list.
I have just one question, if I might.
Yes.
You've heard a lot of conversation that we don't need these parks right now, that are not going to be used. Can you address that for me, since you're in charge of the Parks and Rec and the programs?
My recreation staff has battle scars up one side and down the other because of what goes on when they have to assign fields for the usage. We have meetings twice a year with all the sports leagues to try to assign them fields for their practices and games. And we do that purposefully so that they can share the pain, and they all come to the table together and they hear the same thing, that this is all the fields that we have and these are the number of teams we have. And while we have fortunately been able to add a couple parks in the last 5 years, it isn't even close to how the proliferation of the growing park of teams in the sports that are out there, as you saw yesterday by the article in regards to that that other soccer organization, and the fields that they're going to develop and how it continues to grow. So I think if you talk to anybody from the little leagues and from the soccer people and the football people, there is a definite shortage of fields, as well as the constant every single season use on the field. It wears them out. There is no chance to maybe shut down a field for a season to let it rehabilitate itself to help with the maintenance of it.
Address the issue that was brought up that the park at George Air Force Base wouldn't be used that much.
It is used now by a Coyote Soccer League. It is used by a Little League. I know one thing that when we do the next Nexus study, there will be a change in the configuration of the park because of what the development is going on out there and their need for some of the property. So that will be downsized and won't be as large as what we had put it on there. But no, it is constantly being used. The Westwind Sports Center is very busy now that it was always busy with racquetball, and now that the Corner Club is closed down, that area there there's a waiting line to get in to use the courts there.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard from the adult softball league. I don't know the name of them. I know there's a couple of them up here. That they're very upset because they can't get times at a lot of the fields, and they've been bugging me for more playing time, more fields, because they play during the week at night time.
Correct.
To add on to what Mr. Hunter just said, I had a conversation with you, I think about a week or so ago. I kicked off a season of the Little League thing there was starting, and there was one field that there was about 4 teams there, and they wanted a handicap baseball diamond, and they came up to me. I had never thought about that before, and they said, watch, and the wheelchairs are having trouble going around, and what we would think of as normally as a perfectly good baseball diamond, they said, well, can't the city make us I would assume tartan track or something like that, a baseball field just for handicapped people? That's another wrinkle that you never even think about until somebody comes up. But there was four full teams of handicapped people with everything from crutches to the wheelchairs and everything else playing baseball out there, but the field wasn't adequate for that. And I said, okay, here we go. There's another special need that we might have built into that. But if you do that, then that takes that field out of play for most of us that have not that problem. And so anyway, I don't know that it's something we could ever even do, but still, the community is asking for it. And as we grow here, we're a 100,000 city and 400,000 for the valley, and things like that are beginning to crop up. There's more and more of those kids out there that want to exercise that field too, and for us to do that would be a tremendous added expense. It's not even calculated in anything we're considering.
With the new homes come younger families with kids, and then the demand grows. If we're not an aging community, we're a young community, and it's going to continue to be that way.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Gargan? Thank you. Roberts, from a staff perspective, anything further to share with the council?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm repeating myself. I personally think that the entire development impact fee process is flawed. I think it is the wrong way for the state of California to develop infrastructure. I think it's wrong for developers. It's wrong for the city. It's wrong for the people who buy homes. But that is the playing field that the state has adopted. I think it's getting worse. What Sandbag, I don't know why no one is concerned about what Sandbag is doing. The Nexus study that they have now come out with requires 50% of the La Mesa Nisqually interchange to be paid directly out of the pocket of developers. There are interchanges in that Nexus study by Sandbag in other cities that require that 80% of the cost of those interchanges come directly out of the pockets of developers. City of Victorville is the only one that is at those Sandbag meetings month after month fighting against what Sandbag is doing. Mike Rothschild sits in a very lonely seat month after month as the lone dissenting vote. Victorville was the only agency to vote against that sandbag nexus study. Nobody seems to be fighting this fight with sandbag in the state of California, which is who is really creating this problem. Having said that, there are two questions that have yet to be addressed on the impacts to the city if development impact fees are collected below the level that our nexus study shows they need to be. Let's use Councilman Cabrielis' example. If $7,000 of park fees were not collected on 100 homes, that's $700,000. That is a permanent loss. No one has identified how that $700,000 is going to be replaced. At the last nexus study, what the challenge was, and it was appropriate challenge by the BIA, when Agajanian attempted to make up for money that had been under-collected in previous years, and the BIA appropriately challenged that is not legally allowable. What that means is every dollar that you give up today, there is no legal means for you to collect it. So you have to reduce then the number of parks that you are going to build, unless there is some new unforeseen revenue source that comes available to us in the future. The second issue that must be addressed is that the Rose Institute study identified that building homes, incentivizing home development results in $230 per capita sales tax revenue. Well, what has not been addressed is that just the cost of fire and police alone for each new home is $243 per capita. So it is a net loss for each one. So that issue still has not been addressed, is to if you incentivize the development of residentials through lower development impact fees, where do you address the loss in revenue from providing the necessary services to those homes? Staff has no answers for those questions, and therefore the recommendation, we can find no financial reason to recommend incentivizing residential development through lower development impact fees. Wish we could. We can't find a way to do that.
Questions or comments from members of the council?
I have one. And this letter from the BIA, it shows that current total is $11,327.15. Correct? Is that what you have? And they're asking for a temporary adjustment for $4,937.93. And that temporary adjustment is for a 12-month period. They also have a calculation which is $8,961.68, which says that it's a revised nexus calculations to the accurate amount. Can you give me an answer on why the difference from 11,000 to 8,000? Forget the 4,000 for now, but the difference between the two?
No, that's in a BIA letter. I can't address the difference in their numbers.
Who's the author of the letter?
It's a BIA letter.
Somebody sign it?
I'm going to go to the last page. Well, the last page is signed by Frank.
Frank, can you respond to Ms. Solomon's question about the numbers?
It's in a letter dated May 9th. I'm sorry, May 6th.
Good morning. I had addressed a few of those points yesterday morning. Really, the main components of what we're finding difference in the fee totals between what the adjustment is at 11,327 versus what we're seeing is a few major points. First of all, in the letter that we had received, from Mr. McGlade back when our development impact fee calculations started. He had mentioned that there are two pretty simple components as to what he was escalating the fees to. Well, actually, there are three. The sandbag cost escalation, there was an escalator and adjustments on building costs, and there was an escalator and adjustment on park costs, okay? For the sandbag nexus adjustments, those were made, and that's in the calculation where you see the new fee for the new component. It's exact $4,470.05. That's what you passed back in March. So, and we have no further comment on that. In terms of the cost escalator adjustments, the building costs he had mentioned were 7.5%. I'm reading directly from his letter that he sent to us on November 29th, 2007. He said building costs were escalated by 7.5% based upon research utilizing several contractors and architect. But if you look at his figures in the particular cost calculations, he doesn't escalate them by 7.5%. He actually escalates them by significantly more than that. If you go to page 7 of that letter, there are components in line items saying, for example, the Civic Center and Library, the Library Community Center, where he said that line item would cost $12,500,000 in 2007. In this study, it's saying it's going to cost $22 million, which is a 76% increase, which is significantly more than 7.5% what he's saying. In the satellite library line item, it says it was going to cost $3 million in 2006. Now he's saying it's going to cost $5.5 million, which is an 83% increase. So there are obviously some discrepancies between what he was saying the building costs were going to be escalated at versus where we're seeing at right now. Addressing the park line items, he had mentioned that land costs have gone down, but he's also saying that equipment costs, and this is on page 5, equipment costs for parks were increased by $100,000 per acre based upon recently completed park projects in the High Desert and the Inland Empire, which equates to $441,000 per acre. What we recalculated was we looked back and said, let's take a look at what's on the market right now in terms of land that you could potentially purchase. And in the attachments that we sent to you, we sent land that's available right now. It's on LoopNet. It's available to purchase, and we found between $45,000 and $60,000 per acre. We also went back and aggregated all the numbers from the city of Hesperia, the city of Adelanto, Apple Valley, and 15 total cities in terms of what their park costs were. And if you go to page, I believe it is 6 of our letter, we have for the last 2 years what every other city we've worked with in terms of development impact fees, their park calculations were in terms of what they're costing per acre. And that averages out to about $240,000, which is $200,000 an acre lower what Mr. McGlade is saying. That's pretty much how we reached our calculations. And adjusting those numbers is where we reached the $8,900 per unit figure.
Thank you.
If I can, Matt, Councilwoman, members of the council, this is a situation of a dog chasing its tail. The changes in prices of land and construction costs, particularly in today's economy, are extremely volatile, both up and down. And a 30-day change in the time that you run any of these numbers can change all of the numbers. This is the reason that staff has been pushing and had council agreement to redo the numbers every year on a set date. And so whatever the numbers are on that date, that's the numbers that you go with. In 12 months, if the cost of land has gone down, if construction costs have gone down, the updated study will take that into account. When we did our update that has already been approved by the council, but certainly with respect to roads, and the BIA was here and supported that approval, there had been adjustments made based upon volatility in the cost of the market, and the Park and Recreation community had reduced the land costs to what they were at that time. But if you now have 4 months of delay in implementing the program, all of the cost numbers have changed. And if you wait another 30 days, all of the cost numbers will have changed again. So the only way to do this is to do as we agreed to on the last development impact fee, is to set a date and to do this on an annual basis, and the numbers are what the numbers are on that date.
Mayor, if I might, and I'll address the library issue, and Mr. Gargan can jump in if he wants to. When we discussed the library, we looked at a specific location and a specific size of a library. As you know, we went out for a study on our library to see where it should go and what size it should be, and we found out from our study that our thought is our library is too small. It suggested that it wouldn't serve our needs here in the city. And Mr. Gargan has redone those figures on what we need and what we should have, and that's why the change is in there, is because we were probably 20,000 square feet or thereabouts short on the library that we should have. And then location-wise, we're looking for land, and building costs have gone up. And so the larger library obviously takes in consideration those figures, and those adjustments are going to happen every time we deal with a project. So.
Other questions or comments? Thank you. Well, Council, we have a significant public policy issue to address first, and that would be, what is the role of the City of Victorville in the housing market issue? Once that question is answered, then the second question is, what, if anything, should the City of Victorville do with regard to the request of the BIA for a deferral, or for actually the request of the BIA is a reduction in fees. I struggle with this issue for several reasons. First off, I guess I was a little surprised, not at the numbers in the Rose Institute report, but just the fact that, I have always viewed the Rose Institute and Claremont McKenna colleges as being pretty conservative when it comes to government involvement in free enterprise. And so I guess I was somewhat taken back that they would be the ones selected to do the numbers, because it directly links government into the private sector. I struggle with that. I happen to be a big supporter of capitalism and a market-driven economy, the concept of risk and reward. I know that there's the frequent reference that we're partners. I'm not so sure I agree with that. We don't participate in the upswing, and we shouldn't. We're not putting our capital at risk, and we're not burdened with the responsibilities of delivering the product. So I've never felt that it was something that we should look to the building industry in good times and say we want a piece of the pie. I would oppose that. It just, from a public policy standpoint, does not make good sense to me. Now the industry is in the toilet, not because anybody was a bad person, but in my opinion, greed controlled the market-driven economy. Banks got bad policies in place to fund housing at a level that should never have been funded. The building industry, as is fair in a market-driven economy, rode that horse as long and as hard as they could, and they rode it to well beyond where the market should have been. And the consuming public was just as culpable. They bought homes they never should have purchased, and lenders crafted innovative ways to put people in homes knowing that it couldn't last. There is a segment of this market that lends to own. And what I mean by that is they're not particularly concerned about whether the person pays off, because they have no problem foreclosing and ultimately owning the property. Now, I suspect they wouldn't feel that way today because I don't think anybody predicted the glut of foreclosures that was going to occur. But that, to me, is the public policy issue that's before this council, and it has been every time we've addressed public policy issues for DIF fees. They've already been able to receive the benefit of a 5-month. It'll be 6 months by the time any implementation could occur because of the nature of the decision-making process. They're asking for 2 years and a reduction. I find that very, very difficult to deal with. I will say, however, I am somewhat persuaded by Ira Norris's letter of yesterday, May 13th, where he creates the analogy of the things that the city does to assist business and industry to locate here, not just at former George Air Force Base, but throughout the city. Our number one goal in the city has always been job creation, and if you look at the housing industry as a not brick and mortar building homes, but as a component of the overall economy of the community, then I think what Ira Norris is suggesting, that maybe we should look at this issue in the same way that we look at attracting a Boeing or a Pratt & Whitney, and look at the deferral of development impact fees as an incentive that we put into the pot in order to get subcontractors back to work, to get builders building homes, and as a part of a broader economic model than just what I think we've been focused on, which is trying to find some way to get another house built and lower the price so more people can qualify for the loan. In my heart, I do not want to grant the BIA's request. I think it's bad public policy. Having said that, none of this is perfect. It's not a perfect science. You know, our numbers are just as volatile and subject to challenge as the BIA or anybody else. I honestly don't believe that what they're pitching and what Manfred Kyle suggests in his report will work. But I'm not in that business. I would be willing to support a temporary deferral to December 31st with a revisit in late October, early November, so that we can address it effective with whatever ordinances that we would need to enact on January 1. If it can do what they say it can do, it will be a worthwhile experience in the context of trying to revitalize the industry, the housing industry in Victorville. That will give the BIA ample time, based upon the 6 months that's already elapsed, to see how far they can spread this program with our sister cities in the Victor Valley. I'm prepared to adopt a model somewhat similar to Ontario, which would be, I think in their view, 8 months. I'm willing to go to December 31st with a cap per builder. Now, I understand the cap per builder in Ontario is $1.8 million. I think that's too high a number for our community. We don't build homes in the stratosphere of Ontario, and I'm not exactly sure what the cap should be, but Ontario has been given as the example by the BIA of, at least the example given to me yesterday or the day before. So I'm at least willing to consider something like that. I am not willing to consider a 2-year postponement. I am not supportive of the suggestion that we roll our fees back to the reduced number. So that's my thoughts on a very complex, a very volatile subject. I know that my position will be offensive to the BIA. It'll probably cost me some friends in the development business, but just like the tough public policy decision we had last night on paramedics, our primary responsibility is to the 105,000 people that look to us for police, fire, roads, parks, recreation programs, and a quality of life. Our first obligation is not to the BIA. It's not to the building industry. That doesn't mean that we can't help. That doesn't mean that we ought not to look for ways to make it better for them, because just as Ms. Miller said, there are people who are hanging on by their fingernails that are on the periphery of this, the suppliers, the subcontractors, the surveyors. And I'm sensitive to trying to do something to assist what is a tough time, but I'm not prepared to enter into a 2-year subsidy of the housing industry, and if that costs me friends and the support of the BIA, so be it. That's my position.
Mayor? I would support that, but I'd also like to make a comment in regards to our local economy. Well, the economy nationwide is not just the housing industry that's, as you said, it was in the toilet. If you can see the storefront shutting down, the stores are shutting down, people aren't employed. And I think we need to, if this will help, then I'm willing to support that, because we need to put our people back to work so they can go out and buy from the local retail stores and so on, and infuse some money back into the economy. We in the public sector are sometimes very immune from that, because me being coming from the public sector, you know, we're kind of immune from that sometimes. We don't see this, but I have 2 grandsons that are in the construction industry that aren't working right now. So it's a personal thing with me too, because you can see that. So it's not just the housing industry, but it's every other thing that's related to that in the economy in total. So whatever we can do, and we're doing it nationwide, we're trying to do things. But statewide, we're trying to do things. Countywide, we're trying to do things to help out with the economy. So locally, I think we should, if this is something that we can do, then I think we should be able to go ahead and do that. And I would support.
I agree. I hope it does help some. But I really am concerned about the difference in the numbers that we have with the BIA. This 11,000 to the 8,000 is something that I hope when we sit down in December that we can both agree on the numbers, the BIA and our staff. It's just last time was the same thing, that we didn't agree with the numbers. They were different. But this is something that really bothers me, because when we do the numbers, and if we're all doing it the same way, it should come out the same amount.
Mr. Hunter or Mr. Rothschild?
Well, it gets kind of back to a little bit of what you've indicated you could support reluctantly. And I was thinking that we did put this on autopilot a year ago, and hopefully we weren't going to go through these on an annual basis anymore, because diffs are clearly defined. They're not like a general tax, sales tax or property tax or something, and it waves it over the whole budget. These diffs are defined by all the different things that we're spending money on. It's not something that we're just creating a list and then let's go out and build a park, or let's go out and put a street in, or anything else. So this kind of taxation here is clearly a fee. It isn't a tax. It is a fee, and it's a fee forced on us by the state, the dysfunctional state that we live in. You know, after Prop 13, and I support Prop 13 for different reasons, but the fact is that the state has said, okay, if we're not going to steal the money from you that way, then we'll steal it from you the other way. Future growth, we'll squish there. They'll have to pay. So here we sit here with this defined list of things that we must come up with, and as the state law clearly says, and probably rightfully so, we should not be able to go retroactive. So as each month goes by, we lose money that we're not going to recover. I do believe that the economy, from time to time, government ought to have a role in helping boost the economy a bit. And I've kind of thought this through a bit, and my thought was that we've got about 3 or 4 months into this process that the building industry has benefited from through the dialogue. I'm suggesting from this date forward 6 months that we freeze the parks and facilities portion of the diffs for 6 months. we put a cap on it the reason I'm picking 100 houses is that in the first quarter here, we had something like 25 or 39. I forget what was the number, 39? In the first quarter. If we put a cap of 100 houses max benefiting from this freeze on the diffs, after that point in time, the diffs would kick back in if it beats the 6-month line. And and I don't know how you distribute that 100. I wouldn't want one builder to come and scoff up all the 100. But there's one more proviso that I'd put into that, and that is that those houses are under construction within a year. That would be the other part of the 6-month freeze thing, that if they take advantage of this, come in and say, we want 10 houses or 20 houses or something in this package, and they have to start construction now. They can't just sit on that, say, oh, I've got my diff benefits froze here, and I've got my plan submitted, so now I'll sit for 2 years. That won't work. So, however that 100, I picked 100. It could have been 70 or 80, but that was my thought was that we freeze the diffs on the parks and facilities for 6 months. We cap it at 100 houses, and they have to go under construction in the year here. All those things would be put into that type of an emotion. Now, that's an idea. I put it on the floor. If there's a modification or some other change in that, or even that this is not something you could live with, that's fine too. But that was my thoughts on the whole thing.
Mr. Hunter?
I got to clarify something with both of you. BIA is requesting that the fees go to $4,937.93. Is that what you're suggesting?
It's not what I'm suggesting.
No, that's the.
Is that what you're saying?
No.
You're saying freeze. What do you mean by freeze? Leave them at what they are?
We've already approved over 6,000 in diffs. So this is, I assume that number.
Okay, currently we're at $10,947.
Right.
That's park fees. Is that where you're talking about freezing it at that dollar amount? Or are you talking about taking the park fees out of here?
Well, let me answer where I'm at.
Okay.
The whole issue has been whether or not the automatic adjustments in the fees would have occurred in January, which was the agreement we reached with the BIA. We have not implemented what would have been those increases.
$100.
I'm not prepared to roll back the numbers. That's not the spirit of my comments. I am willing to live with the fee that was in effect, I guess theoretically, through December 31st.
$10,000.
And I'm willing to defer what the increase would have been. But I am not prepared to roll back.
Okay, so you're both saying to keep it at the $10,947, not do the $300 increase, which I think is what, isn't that correct?
Whatever the number would have
Okay,
been.
all right,
Then
not increase it.
That's the spirit of my
And
comment.
defer that amount for 6 months, which, here's one of my comments I'm not sure I understand. We already defer it. We already defer these fees. We don't collect these fees until close, somebody, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong. We don't collect the fees until building's complete and occupancy, correct? Right. Okay, so we already defer these fees until they build their homes and the people move in. So why are we asking to defer this when we already do everything we're talking about?
The current fee is $11,327 based upon the road portion increase that was agreed to in our meeting 60 days ago, I think it
Okay.
was. And we only made this was the annual adjustment that was supposed to occur in January. We only increased the road portion, and now there is the other portion, park and recreation. Those numbers were adjusted down prior to the date based upon reduced land values, and so there is still a recommended increase.
That's why I'm trying to understand what everybody's talking about. So you're both just talking about the increased portion of it.
That's the only point I'm talking
not taking away the park fees as they had suggested, is making those zero for 12 months. Okay.
We're talking about 6 months right now, aren't we?
Well, 6 months current fee. We're not taking away the park fees, though. Because we're not going to zero as they asked. We're keeping it
understand.
where it was.
But Terry was talking about
My motion was simply directed towards the increase from what, and have not increased yet.
Because that's not what the BIA is asking for.
I understand that.
I just want to make sure everybody.
I'm just saying, that was my motion, the
Okay.
intent of my motion was to defer the increase.
Okay. Well, Mr. Brown's gone, so I'm sorry he's gone, but number 4 here, let me just go over this issue with his letter. He says that has the city in its review of the recommended increase in DIF fees taken in consideration that commercial development does not add to the community's population base. I disagree with that. They may not live here, but with all commercial development, we get a lot of the surrounding communities coming in and taking advantage of our roads, our police, our fire. So I have to disagree with that portion. They do increase our community on a daily basis. I think, my opinion is that we're going to set a dangerous precedent. I think we're going to get that nose under the tent, as we often talk about, and I'm concerned about getting back to where we need to be. First of all, I think we're too low on police and fire. I think our fees are too low. We don't charge enough. I'm not convinced that we do this. The other cities are going to be approached aggressively like we are, because I can tell you the same thing you've said, is they're going to not go for this at the other cities. I can pretty much tell you that. I have a concern with continually changing our philosophies and our policies on what we're doing. We made determination on this council that every year it's going to be, adjustments will be made up or down, whatever the case may be. And I get tired of coming here and sitting for hours and hours and going over DIF fee issues every year. We made a policy, let's stick with it. This is the DIF fees, this is what we're supposed to do. Let's just make it stand. I want builders to get busy too, but I don't honestly believe, well, first of all, if we're doing what you're saying, $300 isn't going to be an incentive package to them whatsoever. They want the fees decreased by $7,000. That's not what we're doing. If we're just going to defer the $300, that's not going to help them stimulate anything. Let's just do what we're supposed to do, continue on with what our staff has said we need to do to make this economy or our city a place to live that people want to be, and not keep changing our minds every time someone comes to us and wants to change DIF fees because it's a bad economy, we made a mistake, we didn't calculate right. We're going to go through this every year, and I'm getting real tired of doing this. So my vote's going to be no. You know, we set what we need to do, let's do it.
Questions or comments from other members of the council?
Yeah, I think what we've done is we went ahead and we now have our employees just working 4 days a week. We've cut the time that they're here. You know, everybody is cutting. In our business right now, where we get our rock, which is we're just a spit in the bucket when it comes to businesses. I have truckers cutting their fees coming from Las Vegas and Arizona just to keep busy and just to get paid a little bit so they can make their house payment. I don't see why we can't pass it on. We pass it on to our customers. We cut the price because they've cut their trucking fees. You know, and they're asking for, they asked for 2 years. I know it was just mentioned for just a blip. That's what I remember. Now, all my concern is, okay, so we include the park and rec. Sure, we're in trouble. We don't know what the charter is going to do. I don't think we're that big of trouble here at the city. I think we're going to make things work, and we're not letting anybody go. And John's smiling at me because I'm getting old. But anyway, I think if we brought it to where they wanted it, to $8,961.68 for 6 months, let's just pass it on a little. Let's just give everybody else a break. Like I say, I see truckers come in there and deliver our stuff, and I know they're hurting, and I know they have families in this city. But and they're giving us a heck of a break just to bring our supplies in. So I think for 6 months, I think it wouldn't hurt us to bite the bullet, pass it on, and then, like you said, things are going down. Rock is not as high. People want to stay busy. And we're passing it on to our customer. So I don't see what the big deal is. And then we have it, yes, we did say we would look at it every year. And God willing, and hopefully everything works out, that we have a boom again next year. I doubt if it'll be that big again, ever. But for now, I don't see why we just can't bite the bullet.
Any other questions or comments?
I would agree with Joanne. And the question is that, we talked about the charter city. And so if the charter city becomes a reality, then the park, at least the park fees, I don't know about the facilities, but at least the park fees, or the park development can then be shifted over to the developers. So that would take the burden off the city. The other thing and the action we took last night on the fire, and Bob mentioned that that's going to have to be reworked because those numbers are going to change as far as your DIF fee for fire protection. I guarantee you they're going to change, And so we're going to have to look at that. But the bottom line is what we were looking at today, I thought, was just the park fees and the facility fees. The other ones were given. We adopted the road, the fire and police would stay. We would adopt those also. It was just the facilities and the park fees that would be deferred or suspended, whatever it is, for the 6 months, or as you suggested, till December. And I would agree to that. I would support that.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. There was an entire fee structure adjustment to occur in January. Is that correct? Correct. All across the board.
Adjustment across the board, correct.
Has any adjustments across the board occurred? Have we implemented any of the programmed January 08 increases in any of the DIF fee components?
Yes, we.
That's it. What about police and fire? So there has been a 5-month delay in implementing the DIF fee component associated with police and fire.
Yes, and there was a couple of months delay.
Do we have any way of quantifying what that is in terms of dollars? I mean, I don't want to delay this. We've got to make a decision within 20 minutes.
Well, the portion of the fee that was not implemented, 1,000 units. That portion, loss is 320 times.
So the reality is the only way we give the building industry relief is if we lower the fees. Does that then trigger a refund obligation?
Challenge of the agreement is.
That's correct. I'd agree with John's analysis. If it's on a go-forward basis, I don't see how anybody would be eligible to refund. You have an obligation to refund.
So if we were to follow the BIA's request, then the DIF fee would be reduced not by the $300 figure, but by what?
$7,000.
Well,
Or thereabouts.
I'm not, there's multiple scenarios on the table. The $8,961 all of our numbers are. There was some discussion about reducing, going to zero, I think, on the participation portion. And so, according to this letter, I think the request is that the total amount that would be paid, $1,937, takes parks and facilities. Have some financial obligations. Fire station. Financial.
My motion wasn't to put it at zero. It was what my motion was, in January, we're supposed to have raised the divs. And I thought we'd paid the traffic, and we had already indicated that the police fire was going to be covered as well. So there was about a 4,000 of the diff left that relates to the parks facility. Not that that goes to zero, no, that's a good question now that you've asked it. But that the increase on that amount is deferred. That's what my motion was.
Which would be $300.
Yeah, about whatever that number is, $300 or $400.
The portion of the fee recommended in January that has not yet been implemented.
Can't imagine we'll do a thing for the building industry.
It doesn't seem like much to me either, but that was the nature of my motion, was that we defer the increase, not defer diffs.
I want to defer the increase. I'm just not inclined to defer or to take it to zero.
But we seem to have these, and I don't want to speak for anybody directly, but I think that there is a possible motion that would center on Mr. Hunter's comments, which would be to reject the BIA request and to instruct staff to fully implement the fees that would have gone in place in January. And I think that's what I sense to be Mr. Hunter's position. And as I think I sense to be Ms. Allman's position, that she's prepared, she would make a motion to grant the BIA request, which would be to reduce the fees for some yet undefined period of time to the level they requested. And I think that's $8,000 and something, whatever that.
That's $4,937.
That's what I sense to be the competing potential motions, although I'm not sure whether Rudy has a variation on that or not.
Well, mine was to go to the zero for the park and the facilities for the 6 months, as you said, till December. I was comfortable with that.
For clarification, the current fee, which was previously adopted, $11,327, $5,054. Facilities is $1,000.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. In Rudy's proposal, there would be a discount of something in excess of $6,000.
300.
Well, have I properly summarized what I think now is three competing positions?
No, I think I would go with Rudy's.
Questions or comments?
And the only reason I say implement the fee, I mean, $300 is not going to help the BIA. That's not going to stimulate their building whatsoever. That's cents on taking.
But the 6,000 will.
6,000, but for 6 months.
I know, but then the 6,000 is going to hurt this city. I mean, I agree with John. Where do we make up that $700,000? You know, we can't. We cannot go back to make it up. And I truly feel sorry for the building industry, but I also feel sorry for everybody else in this community and the things that we have to do for the citizens. I don't know how much of effects it's going to be. I don't honestly think that $6,000 is going to stimulate building. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But
I think it's something, just like the truckers, they're not going to go back and try and make us pay more or double when things start getting better and they bring in the material.
well, we can't do that. We can't
Okay,
go
it's
back.
passing, it's what they call pass it forward. Have you ever heard the term pass it forward? I think that's what we're trying to do here, is pass it forward for 6 months.
That's what I was talking about, but I'm going to withdraw that.
I'm going to withdraw my comments in terms of where I thought I was at. Got 14 minutes. Does somebody want to try a motion?
I'd make a motion that we go ahead and give the BIA 6 months, which would be December 31st, and give them a temporary reduction of the $4,937.93.
No, that's not the reduction. That's what they want to pay. The reduction would be.
I'm sorry, I worded it wrong. It's the reduction of 6,000 what? Of
So
parks
we would eliminate the collection of all
Parks
parks
and-
and facilities
for
fees.
6 months.
amounts to $6,389.22.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not calculating that quick, buddy.
I'll second the motion.
Been moved and seconded.
Before you take a vote, there's a very important detail must be clarified in this motion. Massive heartburn. Currently, we, based in order to occupancy, so we must be very specific. Reduction would only apply to project where the certificate of occupancy is issued prior to December 31st.
Well, hers is 6 months, not December 31st.
Well,
I heard both 6 months and.
But isn't that what you said, December 31st?
Well, that was what I said. I've withdrawn my comments.
No, I mean-
You said 6 months.
Right. Whatever 6 months is.
6 months, and the reduction would only apply if occupancy is issued.
That's Ms. Solomon's motion, John. I'll defer to her.
You agree with that? Okay.
May we vote? It's Ms. Almond's motion. You'll have to address it to Ms. Almond. I don't know.
Well, we discussed. But we can't, that would really be putting a, well, I want to say, but it'll be putting an awful thing in the mix. I think it's from this way forward. Is that what, Andre?
Yeah.
From,
That would be appropriate to do it from this day forward, but
yeah.
Bill, you're talking about there's already permits out there. The fees have not been collected on yet, is that correct? Okay, so if those permits come to fruition and there's a house built, then when the C of O is going to be issued, that's when they would get essentially the break on the fee. The pipeline right now.
Does that work for the BIA?
does it work all right with Andre?
Well,
This way forward?
what Bill is saying is there are a number of tracts in the process right now for which building permits have been granted. Are those also going to be the beneficiaries of this break, or is it going to be to
I
deal
think-
with just new development, which I think is what BIA is asking for, is
Yeah,
all
I
new
think-
development from here forward, for
Right.
which a building permit is pushed, they would be eligible at C of O to get the break.
No, I think what we're looking for is from today forward.
So
Nothing
anything
that's in the pipeline now.
Nothing that's
or-
in the pipeline.
Yes.
The motion? May we vote? It passes on a 3-2 vote. That concludes the DIF fee workshop, and thank you all for coming.